On the evening of April 14, 1984, Jack Griffin went for a jog on the beach near his home. Jack was a farmer and an avid runner. As he looked down on the beach from the cliffs along it, he saw what he at first thought was a doll amongst the rocks on White Strand Beach outside of Cahersiveen, County Kerry, Ireland. When he came to the horrible realization that he may have in fact discovered the body of a baby, he ran to his brother-in-law's house for help. His wife's nephew returned to the beach with him to investigate further. The two men turned the form over and confirmed that it was the naked body of a baby boy with dark hair. The Gardaí, the National Police Service of Ireland, were called to the scene, as was Tom Kernan, the local undertaker. While the baby was deceased, Tom still used water from a nearby stream to baptize him, giving him the name John, reportedly after his own beloved uncle. According to locals, Tom was deeply affected by the baby's death and treated the unidentified baby like a member of his own family. He provided the baby with a casket and arranged his funeral, where local school children, including Tom's daughter Catherine, carried the tiny casket to the Holy Cross graveyard. Hundreds more children came to pray for the unidentified boy and sing him songs at his grave after school. When the body of the baby who would come to be known as Baby John was found, he had extensive injuries, but they did not immediately indicate murder. According to later documents, it was at first believed that the baby might have been stillborn, and his body was disposed of in the sea, where sea creatures bit at the body. However, Baby John's autopsy revealed that his neck had been broken, and he had been stabbed 28 times, with 4 of the wounds piercing his heart. The baby had been murdered. It is believed that Baby John was born on April 9th, 5 days before his body was found, and that he was killed when he was 3 days old. The Gardaí quickly came to theorize that Baby John had been born out of wedlock and killed by his mother so that no one would find out that she had sex and conceived without being married, a theory which made sense given social and legal pressures in place in Ireland at the time. They then began visiting the homes of young women and teenage girls, inquiring about their romantic lives and asking if they had any friends who had a boyfriend or had recently been pregnant. Many of these women and girls later reported the lines of questioning as being confusing and frightening. While limits had been placed on the Catholic Church's role in the Irish government in previous years, the Church still heavily influenced Ireland's politics, education, and culture. The Church wrote the curriculum for all of the country's state-run schools and provided minimal information in its sexual education lessons. Having sex outside of marriage was viewed as shameful. While there was a huge social stigma around premarital sex and having babies out of wedlock, it was also difficult at the time to prevent pregnancies. Condoms required a prescription, and hormonal birth control could only be prescribed to married women, who often still had difficulty finding a doctor who would prescribe it for them. While abortion had been punishable by law in Ireland for over 100 years, the 8th Amendment to Ireland's Constitution had been ratified just 6 months prior to Baby John's death to further ensure that abortion would remain illegal. Women who became pregnant outside of wedlock would often be disowned by their families. Others would be sent away to mother and baby homes for the duration of their pregnancy so as not to disgrace their families. After giving birth, they would have to place their babies up for adoption so they could return home with no one knowing they had gotten pregnant. A 2015 commission of investigation would find widespread abuse within these homes, and the infant mortality rates in them were double that of the general population. Ireland's last mother and baby home did not close until 1996. The Gardaí were also working to identify women who had recently been pregnant, but now did not have a newborn. One such woman was Joanne Hayes, a 24-year-old receptionist who lived on her family's farm in Abbeydorney, over 40 miles north from where Baby John's body had been found. Joanne had been treated at Tralee Hospital for pain and severe bleeding. Staff there initially believed she was having a miscarriage, but soon realized that she had recently given birth. 2 weeks after Baby John's body was found, Joanne and some of her family members were brought in for questioning. Joanne admitted to the Gardaí that she had recently given birth. Her baby's father was a man named Jeremiah Locke, a married man she had met at her job at a local gym. She and Jeremiah had begun seeing each other in 1981. The affair resulted in a pregnancy the following year, which ended in a miscarriage. Joanne became pregnant again soon after, and gave birth to Jeremiah's daughter in May of 1983. Joanne became pregnant by Jeremiah again, but they had ended their relationship by the time she gave birth. She had gone into labor on the night of April 12th, going into the 13th, the day before baby John was found. She gave birth to a boy she named Shane at her family's farm. Unfortunately, Shane was either stillborn or died shortly after his birth. Knowing she would receive more judgment for having a second child out of wedlock than sympathy for her baby's death from the public, Joanne chose to mourn Shane privately. She wrapped him in plastic and buried him alone on her family's property. The Gardaí were not sympathetic. They immediately assumed she was lying and were convinced that she was baby John's mother. Joanne offered to tell them where she had buried Shane, but they only performed a cursory search of her family's property. Not finding Shane's body on their own, they claimed she had made up her story. After hours of aggressive interrogation, the Gardaí were able to get Joanne and 3 of her siblings to sign confessions. Joanne signed the confession after Gardaí threatened to take her daughter and have her placed in an orphanage, charge her mother with murder, and sell her family's farm. According to these confessions, Joanne had killed her newborn son, and her brother had disposed of the body in the sea. According to Joanne's confession, she had killed the baby because of the shame he would have brought onto her and her family. However, she had not killed her first child, who was also the result of her affair with Jeremiah Locke, and was raising her quietly at her family home. On May 1st, 1984, Joanne was charged with murder and remanded to Limerick Prison. Unfortunately for the Gardaí, actual evidence soon emerged contradicting the narrative they had put forth in the family's confessions. Joanne told her sister where she had buried her son Shane, and the day after Joanne was charged with murder, Shane's remains were located on the Hayes family farm, where Joanne had said they would be. Furthermore, testing showed that baby John could not be the son of Joanne Hayes and Jeremiah Locke. While DNA testing was not available at the time, blood type testing was. Joanne and Jeremiah both had blood type O, as did their son Shane. However, baby John had blood type A. Children do not always have the same blood type as their parents, as 2 people with A or B type blood could both carry the recessive gene for type O blood and produce a child with that blood type. However, there is no possible way for 2 people with type O blood to have a child with type A. Some of the investigators on the case still maintained that Joanne was baby John's mother and murderer, while the discovery of Shane's remains and the blood type evidence pointed towards Joanne's initial statements to the Gardaí being correct and to her innocence. Investigators still held that she was guilty of murder because they had gotten her to sign a confession. While we today are more familiar with false confessions provided to police under various forms of duress, the investigators who had convinced the various members of the Hayes family to sign confessions argued that these confessions were absolute proof of Joanne's guilt. Some of the detectives argued that Joanne had actually given birth to twins. One of the twins was the baby whose remains were found on the Hayes family farm in Abbeydorney, and the other was baby John, whose body was found washed up on White Strand Beach. They suggested that Joanne's pregnancy had been a case of heteropaternal superfecundation, a very rare situation in which a woman releases 2 eggs in one menstrual cycle, and those eggs are fertilized by sperm from 2 different men within a short period of time, resulting in twins who have different fathers. If Joanne was capable of having one affair, they argued, she was capable of having 2 at the same time. If she had sex with a man with type A blood around the same time she conceived her son Shane with Jeremiah, she could have had twins, and one of them could have had type A blood, like baby John. However, this theory could not be true if the very confessions that investigators maintained proved Joanne's guilt were also true. In the signed confessions, Joanne had given birth to and killed one baby, not two. This still did not diminish the certainty that some of the investigators on the case felt over Joanne's guilt, or keep them from publicly voicing that view. While investigators were still convinced of Joanne's guilt, the entire legal system did not share their perspective. The blood type evidence, and the Hayes family withdrawing all of their confessions, did lead to the Director of Public Prosecutions dropping the murder charge against Joanne in October of 1984. Charges for concealment filed against members of her family were also dropped. However, their legal ordeal was just beginning. The case attracted national attention for various reasons: horror at baby John's violent death, allegations of physical and psychological abuse by the Gardaí in their efforts to get signed confessions from members of the Hayes family, and concern over how Joanne Hayes was treated during the investigation from Ireland's growing number of women's rights activists. All of the upset, as well as concerns from the Minister of Justice that the Gardaí may have been grossly negligent in their handling of the case, led to a tribunal being convened. On January 7, 1985, the Kerry Babies Tribunal of Inquiry, presided over by Judge Kevin Lynch, began in Tralee. However, rather than investigating how the Gardaí investigated the case, as it was supposed to, the tribunal quickly devolved into a personal attack on Joanne Hayes, in which her character and morality were put on trial. The private young woman had all of her most personal and intimate information put on display for the public. Numerous psychiatrists provided unfavorable opinions about her personality and critiqued the amount of emotion she displayed over her son Shane's death. A map was displayed showing the locations where she had sex with Jeremiah Locke, and a doctor commented on the size of her birth canal as part of his testimony. Numerous members of the Hayes family were called to the witness stand, where they were subjected to intense questioning. But Joanne received the worst treatment on the stand by far. Joanne was cross-examined over the course of 5 days, which remains the longest amount of time in Irish history that a witness has been questioned. She was asked more than 2,000 questions. Her questioning appeared to be an exercise in embarrassing her, forcing her to discuss the most private details of her sex life and other intimate matters, including the details of how she had lost her virginity, her menstrual cycle, and the number of sexual partners she had been with. This line of questioning was allowed because showing that Joanne had previously been with other men was viewed as evidence supporting the theory that she could have conceived twins with different fathers. At one point, Joanne collapsed in response to the invasive and aggressive questioning she was subjected to, at which point the judge ordered her to be sedated so that she could continue testifying. Like the tribunal proceedings, the tribunal's findings had more to do with Joanne Hayes than with the case or the allegations against the Gardaí who worked on it, as was the tribunal's original intent. The tribunal's final report did make some critiques of the Gardaí, but it did not find them responsible for any wrongdoing. The tribunal did not substantially address how they had managed to get the confessions from the members of the Hayes family at all, much less deal with the allegations of assault and abuse. Judge Lynch dismissed the obviously factually inaccurate confessions as the byproduct of grief over the death of baby Shane, which just happened to manifest in the same manner within multiple members of the Hayes family independently. The main investigators in the case never faced repercussions for the physical and psychological abuse the Hayes family says they inflicted upon them, and while they were at the time transferred to different departments, eventually they all received promotions. The tribunal's final report was, on the other hand, highly critical of Joanne Hayes. For some reason, its author felt compelled to place all of the responsibility for Joanne and Jeremiah's relationship on Joanne, stating, "Obviously, it takes two people to have an affair, but Joanne Hayes was the main or dominant force in the liaison between herself and Jeremiah Locke." For his part, Jeremiah Locke gladly accepted the sexual favors which he knew were so readily available to him. The final report from the tribunal did acknowledge that Joanne Hayes was not the mother of baby John. However, it also inexplicably found that she had murdered her own son, Shane, despite a lack of any real evidence that he was murdered. This conclusion was made solely based on the testimony of Joanne's elderly aunt, who had dementia brought on by years of alcohol abuse. Shane's exact cause of death could never be confirmed because he had not been embalmed, and therefore his remains had decayed extensively before his body was finally located and examined, but no evidence contradicting the claim that he had died of natural causes before or shortly after his birth was found. The judge also wrote in the report that all of Joanne's family members had willingly provided their false statements. He called them all liars for testifying to abuse from the Gardaí during their questioning, referring to Joanne's mother Mary specifically as a blatant perjurer. In addition to all of the negative attention and criticism over her personal life from the public and from the legal system, Joanne's unwanted notoriety did also bring her supporters. Women protested how Joanne was being treated outside of the court where the tribunal proceedings were being held, and she received notes and flowers from women all over Ireland. While this support helped Joanne cope emotionally, it would be years before she found any legal relief. Joanne was never tried for or convicted of the murder of her son Shane, but for decades, the findings of the tribunal, which claimed she had killed her baby, stood. Baby John's killer also remained unidentified, leaving him without justice, and Joanne Hayes with suspicion still surrounding her. DNA was first used as evidence in an Irish court in 1994. While the technology to definitively determine if Joanne Hayes was Baby John's mother or not existed and was being used in Ireland for some time, a DNA test was not run in the case for years, despite requests from Joanne Hayes. Retired Detective Jerry O'Carroll, who had been one of the lead investigators on the case and remained a vocal supporter of the theory that Joanne had given birth to twins fathered by two different men, wrote a newspaper article in April of 2014 calling for DNA testing in the case because he was still sure that it would prove that Joanne Hayes was the mother of both Shane and baby John. Speaking publicly through her family solicitor, Joanne Hayes then again asked that DNA testing be conducted in the case so as to finally prove that she was not baby John's mother and remove suspicion of her being involved in his murder once and for all. A few years later, this testing was finally conducted and did just that. On January 16, 2018, it was publicly announced that a DNA sample provided by Joanne Hayes had definitively proven that she was not baby John's mother. Joanne received public and private apologies from Taoiseach Leo Varadkar on behalf of the state and Acting Garda Commissioner Donald O'Cullen on behalf of the force. In a public statement, Superintendent Flor Murphy said, "It is a matter of significant regret for An Garda Síochána that it has taken such a long time for it to be confirmed that Miss Hayes is not the mother of baby John. On behalf of An Garda Síochána, I would like to sincerely apologize to Miss Hayes for that, as well as the awful stress and pain she has been put through as a result of the original investigation into this matter, which fell well short of the required standards." These public apologies did not impact the official record of the case, however. In 2019, the Hayes family began legal proceedings seeking damages in the High Court against the Garda Commissioner, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Minister for Justice, the Attorney General, and the state for their treatment during their interrogations and the public inquiry. After months of mediation, a settlement was reached in December of 2020. Various members of the Hayes family received financial compensation. The payout is reported to have totaled 2.5 million euros, with 1.5 million euros going to Joanne Hayes, 300,000 euros going to each of three of her siblings, and 100,000 euros going to her daughter. The other stipulation of the settlement involved the family being formally cleared of any wrongdoing. Despite the DNA evidence proving that baby John was not Joanne's son, and therefore that she and her family did not kill him and dispose of his body as described in the statements the Gardaí eventually got them to sign, and the apologies they received following its announcement, the findings of the 1985 tribunal still stood. The tribunal had found that the Hayes family were all liars, particularly in regards to their claims that they signed their confessions under duress from members of the Gardaí, and that Joanne had killed her stillborn son, Shane. Joanne Hayes therefore sought a declaration that any findings of wrongdoing contained in the tribunal's report were untrue and were in breach of her constitutional rights. The High Court granted these declarations on December 18, 2020. One of them stated that all findings of wrongdoing made against Joanne and her family by the Kerry Babies Tribunal were unfounded and incorrect, and the other stated that the constitutional rights of the Hayes siblings had been violated during the investigation, detention, questioning, arrest, charging, and prosecution of them between April and October of 1984. The declarations were then attached to the tribunal report in the Parliamentary Library, effectively formally absolving Joanne Hayes and her family of the wrongdoings the report had accused them of. The same day the declarations were made, the Minister for Justice and the Garda Commissioner expressed in the High Court deep and sincere regret to Joanne Hayes for the truly appalling hurt and distress she and her family endured. Joanne Hayes hopes to regain some sense of privacy now that she has finally been formally cleared of wrongdoing. After the declarations were made, she released a statement reading, "I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of myself and my family to acknowledge all those who have supported us over the past 36 years. I would particularly like to thank my friends who, with their support and kindness, gave us hope and strength through the darkest moments of this ordeal. Throughout the years, the kindness and sense of community we have experienced has helped us through the most challenging moments of the period. It is my sincere hope and belief that after 36 years, the suffering and stress of this ordeal is now finally behind us." Jerry O'Carroll, one of the detectives who interviewed Joanne in 1984 and remained a vocal proponent of the theory that she was the mother and killer of baby John, despite all evidence to the contrary, finally had to accept that baby John was not her son following the DNA testing in 2018. However, he did not feel sorry for Joanne or what she was subjected to during her interrogation and the tribunal. "I have only sympathy for two creatures in this, the babies. That is my final word on that," he said after the announcement of the DNA results. He never apologized to Joanne for any of the inflammatory statements he publicly made about her in the years following the tribunal. He vehemently denied all claims that he and other members of the Gardaí mistreated Joanne and her relatives to extract the confessions that later proved to be false from them. He claimed to have never been anything but nice to Joanne. He died peacefully at the age of 77 on January 2, 2024, at the Palliative Care Unit in University Hospital, Kerry. The behavior of the Gardaí during the interrogations in 1984 has not been directly resolved. The investigators involved deny wrongdoing and say the confessions they obtained were given willingly. However, this assertion is difficult to accept in light of the known facts, and were it to be true, it leaves a glaring question still unanswered. In the words of Joanne's longtime solicitor, Pat Mann, the one question that has, at all times, remained unsatisfactorily unanswered is how 5 people, different people at the same time in the same building, made 5 effectively dovetailing statements confessing to a crime that science said they couldn't have committed. That question has never been properly answered. As Pat Flanagan wrote in 2021 for the Irish Daily Mirror, to this day, the term Kerry babies has become synonymous with injustice and the state's barely concealed contempt for women, especially for those who give birth to children outside marriage. With Joanne Hayes formally cleared of killing her stillborn son Shane, only the murder of one baby, baby John, exists, and it remains unsolved. The case is therefore now that of the Kerry baby, rather than the Kerry babies, although negative associations still linger with that name. The case is now instead often referred to as that of baby John or the cahersiveen infant, after the specific place in Kerry where his body was found, and as he was officially known, so as to distinguish him from Shane, who was officially known as the Abby Dorney baby at the tribunal. when the Gardaí announced that DNA evidence had proven that Joanne Hayes was not the mother of baby John in 2018. They also announced a new inquiry into his murder. The Gardaí maintained that they were not looking only at women as potential suspects. They would be investigating the possibility that the child's father could have also been involved, and that the mother could have been the victim of rape, incest, or domestic abuse. In September of 2018, they conducted door-to-door inquiries on Valencia Island, off the coast of County Kerry, asking for residents to provide voluntary samples of their DNA. Baby John's DNA, which had been sequenced from a sample from 1984, had been compared to the DNA profiles in Ireland's national database, which was created in 2015, but no familial matches had yet been found. Investigators hoped that having more DNA samples from people living in the area would help them use genetic genealogy to identify baby John's parents. No specific tips had led the Garda Serious Crime Review team to Valencia Island. It had been selected simply because of its proximity to White Strand Beach, where baby John's body had washed up. They had plans to conduct similar inquiries in other communities in South Kerry. Eventually, they used computer mapping to identify places where baby John's body could have gone into the water, given the fact that it ended up on White Strand Beach. They then asked for voluntary DNA samples from residents of the areas surrounding them. On September 14, 2021, baby John's remains were exhumed from his grave at Holy Cross Cemetery in Cahersiveen at dawn. They were then taken to the morgue at University Hospital Kerry in Tralee. There, new, larger samples were taken for advanced DNA testing. A forensic anthropologist also took bone samples in hopes of finding clues about the baby's short life, such as if he had been malnourished and what type of weapon was used to kill him. Baby John was reinterred that afternoon. Baby John's grave at Holy Cross Cemetery was originally just marked with a simple wooden cross. Tom Kernan, the undertaker who had given the baby his name, cared for the grave and made improvements to it as time went on. Baby John's final resting place was vandalized several times over the years. Tom always made repairs when these attacks occurred. In February of 2004, Tom replaced the grave marker with a marble headstone which read, "I am the Kerry baby, baptized on 14/4/84, named John. I forgive." Within a few months, the headstone was completely destroyed. It had been smashed into small pieces, with the Gardaí believing that a sledgehammer had been used in the attack. The destruction of the headstone seemed to confirm concerns amongst the community that whoever had killed baby John had been local and still lived amongst them. Tom Kernan was horrified by the ongoing attacks on the baby's final resting place. "They couldn't leave the child alone in life, and now they can't leave it alone in death. I'm disgusted," he told the Irish Examiner in 2004. Tom was not deterred by the destruction of the headstone. He appeared on Radio Kerry and vowed that if the headstone continued to be destroyed, he would continue to replace it. When he did replace the headstone, he used the same inscription, with one notable difference. He removed the words, "I forgive." He felt he could no longer speak forgiveness on behalf of the baby who was still the target of so much anger and violence, as demonstrated by the attack on his final resting place. The headstone without those two words remained untouched. Tom Kernan continued to maintain baby John's grave until he passed away in April of 2021 and was buried in the same cemetery as baby John. His children have continued caring for baby John's grave. In 2023, nearly 40 years after baby John's murder, a major development came in the case. On March 23rd, a couple, a man in his 60s and a woman in her 50s, were arrested on suspicion of murder at their home in South Kerry. They were detained under Section 4 of the Criminal Justice Act, which allows Gardaí to detain suspects for up to 24 hours. The couple was reportedly identified, thanks to a DNA sample that had voluntarily been given to the Gardaí. This sample belonged, again reportedly, to an individual who is a sibling of baby John and had not yet been born in 1984. When this sample matched to baby John's DNA, the Gardaí identified the individual's parents, the couple they then arrested. The man and the woman were taken to separate Garda stations for questioning. The woman was taken to Castle Island, and the man was taken to Listowel. Their home was thoroughly searched while they were in custody. Irish law would allow for samples of their DNA to be taken from them once they were in custody, but according to their solicitor, both of them voluntarily provided DNA samples. They were questioned in the presence of solicitors and released without charge once the 24 hours they could be held had passed. It is important to note that as of November 2024, no charges have been filed against the couple. As such, their names have not been released, and much of the information about the case against them that can be found in media reports has not been formally confirmed. According to the couple's solicitor, Padraig O'Connell, his clients vehemently deny any involvement in the murder of baby John. Mr. O'Connell has also stated that during their questioning, the couple initially denied being baby John's parents as well. However, Garda sources have told various Irish publications that DNA testing has confirmed that they are in fact the biological parents of baby John. The couple reportedly never spoke to the Gardaí during the initial investigation into baby John's murder. The woman is alleged to be the daughter of a member of the Garda who passed away a few years prior to baby John's birth and murder. The possibility that she was able to avoid being investigated or questioned by the Gardaí in 1984 because of this connection is reportedly also being investigated. It has also been reported that there was a third individual, a man, who was connected to the couple and had a lot of answers about the case. However, he died approximately 5 years before the couple's arrest. DNA testing has allegedly solved one part of the mystery surrounding baby John's life and death by identifying his parents. However, identifying them does not necessarily identify his killers. From a legal perspective, arguing that just because they are the infant's parents also means they killed him is a huge leap. For all anyone knows, the baby could have been placed in someone else's care after he was born. Identifying baby John's parents has opened up a major avenue of inquiry for the Gardaí, but it remains to be seen if they can find enough evidence to make a case against them, or anyone else, in court. So far, the Gardaí have not publicly stated that they have uncovered any new information about those few days in 1984 when baby John was alive, even though they now know a major detail about his birth. They will need to investigate those 3 days when he was alive in order to properly determine the circumstances surrounding his murder. As tempting as it is to simply blame baby John's parents, doing so blindly will not guarantee him the justice he so desperately deserves. What happened to Joanne Hayes at the beginning of the investigation highlights why it is so important to find and follow all of the facts in the case so that now the investigation can hopefully reach its correct end. Despite this major breakthrough in the case, little progress seems to have been made since baby John's parents were allegedly identified. According to the couple's solicitor, Padraig O'Connell, his clients have been living in limbo ever since they were released without charge. They have been unable to return to work and have had to take extra security measures at their home. According to Mr. O'Connell, as of April 2024, they have not been contacted by the Gardaí since their release. In April 2024, more than a year after the arrests were made, a Garda spokesperson said the investigation into baby John's murder remains ongoing and a file will be prepared for the Director of Public Prosecutions in due course. The delay in the preparation of the file has officially been attributed to a number of retirements amongst those working on the case. We will never know if baby John would choose to forgive those responsible for the terrible things done to him, as it once stated on his headstone. But perhaps soon, more than 40 years after his murder, we will finally know who would need to ask him for forgiveness.